Hello and welcome to Digital Craft Festival. Today I'm joined by makers from Crafts Festival, Bobby Tracy and Cheltenham. My name is Louise Jones-Williams. I'm director at Llantarnam Grange Arts Centre. And I'd like to introduce you to our makers, Kato, Russell Kingston, Charlotte Lowe, Francisca Onumah, Lynda Shell, Elizabeth Shorrock and Keith Shorrock. The theme of our conversation today is influences and heritage. And what helps us form our artistic vision. People might have been influenced by family members, teachers, friends, by travelling or their own research. And sometimes it's small incidents that have a profound influence. So that's what we're going to talk about today. I wanted to begin by asking all of you to talk about your family and their influence, or where you grew up, and that sort of early influence on your background and your creativity. Who'd like to go first? Lynda, would you like to go first? You can unmute.
I knew you would pick me.
Tell us about your family and any creativity in the family. Was there family members that sort of encouraged you to make, or that sort of thing?
Yes, most definitely. I come from quite a creative family where there's lots of us that are doing lots of different things. But once I started to think about it, your questions, the two people I think that had the biggest influence on me growing up was my grandmother on my mother's side. She was a very typical kind of wartime make, do and mend person, and being at her house was always exciting. She was always had a little project on the go, and she introduced me to sewing. And she had a big old machine that you had to turn with a handle. So you had to learn quite a lot of skills quite early on, because you needed one hand turning the wheel and the other hand feeding the fabric. Yeah. So I used to just get scraps of fabric and make dolls' clothes and clothes for my teddies and things like that. So she was a great influence, a very, very practical woman. And then, of course, my father, who is a boat builder, he had a massive influence on my growing up. He was always in the garage, always making something, and I was always in there with him, hammering nails into bits of wood and drilling holes and just generally fixing things. Again, he was a very make, do and mend kind of person. And I just loved all the tools and the cogs and the oily things. A bit strange, I know, but I just love that environment. And he used to work down on the docks. He had a massive workshop down there, a boatyard. And I just used to love going there at weekends and playing amongst the machines and the tools and just having a fiddle with things. And his creativity is incredible. And I think that's where I got that drive to make from, definitely.
Brilliant. Yeah, that's brilliant. Yeah, I've a very similar background with the grandmother that sewed for myself. Yes, always making dolls' clothes and things like that.
Always, yeah, always fiddling with something. And I did eventually move on to an electric machine, you'll be pleased to know. And my skills got a little bit better. But I never thought at the time that it was going to be anything that I did. It's just you just think everybody does that.
Yeah, it's like a natural part of your life, I think, when you grow up in a creative house. Yeah. Russell, what about you?
I've got a similar sort of thing. My family have always been really supportive and really creative family. Made lots of music with my brother and mum and dad. Mum's a florist, dad's a stonemason. Always just made stuff. Yeah. My granddad was an engineer, and he moved to Devon, Somerset, moved there, got this old house, and did everything on it. He made a forge to make hinges for his kitchen, and he just made everything. And he got really ill and couldn't work anymore. And my gran played the violin, so he bought some old violins, started restoring them. And then he decided to make his own cello, so he made his own cello. And like, I think it's just my whole family, they're like, just make stuff, and we've always made stuff. And like, we're all like slightly dyslexic and not academic, so anything hands-on, just like you soak in, don't you? Because you're a different sort of learner, so
really,
you feel out of place in a lot of academic places, but then you can like explore a lot because your brain works differently, I suppose.
Yeah, it's being a visual learner, as you said, isn't it? It's a different kind of learning, and it's a very hands-on learning. So it's a completely different environment to school than when you're at home learning from people. And by the sound of it, because
the like DT in that way, you could just. I never did actual work on the projects. We just made weird things with our friends. Is that what
Yeah, that's it. Like you said, the musical instruments and the engineering, or that's all sort of construction, problem solving, and everything, which I would think is very useful, when it comes to ceramics.
Yeah. He built my grand got into ceramics, still does it now, like on the side, and he built her like a kick wheel and made her a kiln, and yeah, it's good.
Amazing, lovely. Keith, what about you?
Hello, Louise.
Hi.
Just about to put the mic on. My first influence was my secondary school. I had a fairly feral upbringing, doing whatever I liked, roaming wherever I liked. And I went to a secondary school that did both metalwork and woodwork. I was better at metalwork than I was at woodwork, but it's the woodwork that stayed with me. And I've done it all my life. For a long time, it was practical woodwork, but then it became more artistic. And in terms of family side, you're going to meet part of my family in a little while, because Elizabeth and I are married. But we also have a daughter who is a fused glass artist, and we also have a granddaughter that is a fused glass artist. They both work together. Must be in our DNA. But growing up and going into the world of work, most of what I did was practical. It was shelving, it was cupboards, I have built a kitchen, and it's really been very, very, very useful and practical. My influences are really quite wide. I like talking to people, I like talking to customers. So at the moment, with no events, I'm pulling my hair out. I really get quite a lot of good feedback from the people I talk to. And to give you one idea, we've had quite a bit of reference to sewing even now. I was at an event in Thirsk, and I was selling just traditional shaker boxes, empty, and for people to put things in, very traditional. And a lady came up to me. She was an embroiderer and a patchworker, and she started to tell me about coming back from America with a shaker box, but it wasn't empty. It actually had a pincushion in. And she said that when she went to courses, went to meetings or with her friends, whenever she got this out, people swooped on it and they wanted to know where to get them. And she said the only place she knew was America. So that directed me into looking at using shaker boxes for sewing boxes. And this one came up. This is probably the first design I had. I'll open this up. And if you look, there's a nice pincushion inside. And it's that kind of feeding off people who come and talk to you. It is wonderful. So no big bang in terms of influences, but lots of little ones from wonderful customers and wonderful other artists as well. It's great talking to other artists.
Yeah. As I said, I think very often it's little small instances for lots of people, isn't it? That sort of, you can have, a general family environment, as Lynda and Russell have been talking about, but sometimes it's small little instances like that, just a single conversation or somebody you bump into or something like that can have a big influence on you going forward.
And I have the advantage that I've got Elizabeth, because we then are critical friends to each other.
Yeah.
So I'll take something over and say, what do you think about this? And she'll give me a decent critique. And you know it's obviously an honest one. And I'll do the same with her.
Yeah.
And that's very useful.
Yeah, that's a lovely creative collaboration then, isn't it? And as you said, you've got, you know, children and grandchildren then can often influence back the other way. You've influenced them, but they can influence you back the other way in their creativity, can't they?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Charlotte, did you want to talk about your family background? Oh, I can't hear you. Oh, there we are. I can hear you now.
Sorry about that. Yeah, so, well, my jewellery is all about celebrating the simple moments in life.
Yeah, we can see it. Yeah.
So basically, it's all about stepping back and thinking about the times that matter most to you. And I've just always been encouraged to be artistic, really, by my mother. So my mum's really artistic. She's a primary school teacher. And just encouraged me to be creative ever since a little girl, really. And she gets doing all little bits and pieces. My dad's an engineer, so he's obviously quite technically creative as well. He makes more industrial things like box and shelving units and things like that. But I've just been very lucky, really, I've got a very big, close family. So I'm very close to my cousins, and we'll together to the beach. And I've just kind of, growing up, become very sentimental, and I like to think about, you know, when you're away and you're on holiday, everything feels, you know, you kind of appreciate what you have, and you appreciate your surroundings more. I like to make jewellery that helps you kind of think about that every day and bring that into the everyday. And I've also, this year I'm celebrating my 10th anniversary, which is why I wanted to show that piece. It's got like a beautiful blue sky on, which brings very, you know, just very happy, emotive feelings anyway, I feel.
Yeah, so it's the influence of sort of ideas and feelings and sentiments, as well as, you know, practical influence as well, isn't it?
Yes, and great-grandfather, well, my great-great-grandfather was actually a jeweller as well in the jewellery court.
Oh, really?
Which I didn't find out till I started becoming one, so that was really nice, because I like to think it's in the genes or something.
Yeah, as Keith said, I think it definitely is.
One with him on the same road as me, so just, yeah, brilliant, really. And I'd just say that my family have been a massive influence, because they're just so lovely to be around. So
good, lovely. Francesca, did you want to talk about your family?
Yeah, so I come from a family that aren't very creative. The only other person that I can think of was my aunt, who used to sew dresses and decorate events and stuff. My grandma was also a baker. So a lot of my influences come from growing up in Ghana. So I lived there till I was about 8, and a lot of the images that I draw from are pictures, old pictures, and I'd look at the clothes that people are wearing, so the patterns and the fabrics and wax fabrics, and like the kente cloth as well. And I draw from that, and then bring it into my own work. Growing up, I remember my brother always encouraged my creativity. I used to draw a lot as a kid, and he'd draw as well with me. And I remember in my grandma's garden, we do a lot of drawings in the sand. We draw houses and just do loads of weird designs in the sand. But yeah, so I tried to bring that back into my work, and yeah, use just the mark making is something that's important in it.
Brilliant. Yeah, and it's sometimes that creativity in a family it's more subtle, isn't it? You know, yes, there's creativity in the dressmaking and things, but it's just sometimes it's just being given the freedom to be creative as well. So and for it not to be something that's a bit odd that you're creative, or that there can be support from a family in that way, can't there? That they just they might not be able to do it themselves, but they're fully supportive of you then.
Yeah.
Lovely. Kate, do you want to talk about your family?
I'm quite similar in that my family aren't all particularly creative, but my nan taught me to embroider, and she was always making clothes and things when I was little, and that's where the embroidery in my work comes from. And my mum was always very encouraging of being creative, and I think their influence was more about the subjects that I work with. So when we were little, we would always be out walking, going to the woods or down to the river. I grew up in Bristol, which doesn't sound like a particularly, like there's a lot of nature around, but my mum taught me to look out for every tiny little detail. And I think that's a lot of what comes through my work and what inspires me now. And now that I have my own children and I go and do the same thing with them, I've sort of rediscovered that curiosity, and it feeds straight back into my work, which is great.
Yeah, that's lovely. And I suppose you do so much of that, as you said, looking at the tiny things in your work, isn't it? So that's bound to have had a big influence on the subject matter you've chosen for your work.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Elizabeth?
Right, fathers again. My father was he was a printer by trade, but he was always making. He did woodwork, serious woodwork, pieces of furniture. He had a lathe that he turned bowls on, and I was very much a daddy's girl. I was in the workroom, I was up on the roof or whatever, with him. And there was always lots of paper at home, because in the bindery, when things were cut badly, there'd always be big piles of, so there was always stuff to draw. Although, having said that, I went to a very academic school. The art wasn't encouraged. In fact, the only exam I've ever failed in my life was an art exam.
What did they know? Nothing.
I know, what did they know? I can still picture it in my head. So it was. I just grew up being natural to make things. Again, dolls' clothes, little books, miniature books, and then I went into textiles quite seriously. I know I was a primary school teacher, but my sideline was always textiles and embroidery, and that gradually moved into the books. Somebody showed me how to make a book, and I was lost really into that. So now, and I think the print trays that I make link back to childhood, because I use old books and the idea of miniature things, and you make little things when you're a child. And the miniature books that I put in the print trays, and you can see them on the wall behind me. Work, that's one there. And again, it's also got the link with printing, because although my father was a printer, not a compositor, if I went into the factory with him at the weekend, it was always the comps room and the trays of type that fascinated. And so I use these, and I take an old book, and sometimes it'll be one you remember from being a child, and cut it up and make the little books to go in the compartments. And I think a full-size tray is 3 times as big as that, but you can buy the little cut-down ones. And so you've got things like with the observer books in, and they, beautiful. Again, a real childhood link there with the observer books. It's finding the right book with the right pictures, and it's linked all the way through. I think my father would be, he's been dead a very long time, I think he would be fascinated to see what I'd done with the print trays, because there was always quite a rivalry between the printers and the compositors, because when he trained, the comps were higher in the hierarchy, if you like, because you had to be able to read. He trained at the early on in the 20th century. So there was always that edge between the printers and the comps.
I think you'd be proud of it. Fascinating.
Oh, I think you would. Yes, I was always very supportive and made things for me. In fact, I mean, I've done various textile crafts, but I suppose the real thing he made for me was a spinning wheel. I'd been on a spinning course, and Keith had bought me for my Christmas present I had a spindle, a full fleece, and I just looked at this fleece and thought, what am I supposed to do? A spindle. And then when we got to my father's the day after Christmas, they'd been colluding, and he'd made spinning wheel. So,
oh, how lovely.
It's really, yeah. I haven't used it for a long time now, she says guiltily.
Oh, nice to look at though, if nothing else, isn't it? Especially when it's been made by somebody.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, lovely. That's all amazing. So lovely to hear. Yeah, just wondered if any of you had any particularly. Keith talked a little bit about teachers being an influence. So whether any of you had teachers either within school or within college, if you did professional art training at college, or perhaps makers since who've been, you know, that particular mentor or influence.
I have.
Yeah, Russell, do you want to tell us about it?
I've got quite a lot of people that have kind of influenced me, and it's always little snippets that have changed the course of what I've done. Like there's a chap called Mark who kind of just supported me. Like I moved to Brighton after college to get out of Devon for a bit to see what the world was like and all that, and then moved back because I missed it. And I couldn't afford a studio there, and I couldn't try for ages, blah blah blah. And he just like, I'd come back to Devon, use his studio. He paid for me to do wood firing courses, keep me interested, and I definitely would have kind of lost my way and probably not done ceramics if he hadn't done that.
Yeah. Took you under his wing a little bit.
Yeah, and every time he was always like, oh, what are you doing? What this, blah blah blah, you should come do this, like use my studio, hit some clay, blah blah blah, you know.
Yeah.
So that was really nice. And then when I finally moved back to Devon, there's another chap called Brian who I shared a studio with for 5 or 6 years. I'd literally parked my van when I got home and saw him over a wall, and I was like, I'd love to get a studio. He was like, yeah, you come use mine. And that was it.
Oh, it's serendipitous.
Yeah, and then he just like let me have a little corner, and then you know, he was like, if you're serious about this, you know, you can use the studio for a bit more, and if you can make it pay, then you can pay half the studio and blah blah blah. And
like practical help as well.
Give me some clay and like, you know, sent me on my way. And that's also the reason I do slipware, because his kiln didn't get to stoneware temperatures. And then he handed me a book which is all the history of Devon, and then he was like, you should look at that. And I was like, all right. And I looked at that and I was like, well, yeah, I can't really do anything else now.
Yeah. So that was more about traditional Devon pottery.
Yeah, which is what I do, like a contemporary version of Devon pottery, basically.
Yeah. Amazing.
Yeah. Use all the same materials and
it's strange, isn't it, how that, like I said, that serendipitous moments like that of just chatting to somebody over a wall, and then they end up being such a huge influence on the direction of your career and what your work looked like, you know. And you think, if you hadn't had that moment, well, would you have gone down the same path? Or strange, isn't it?
And access to, like, he wasn't even throw, he was a sculptor, and he just had a wheel which he gave me eventually, which is like, still use it now, same wheel I got. I wouldn't have access to a kiln, a wheel, blah blah blah, you know. It's all really expensive to get started.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you said, support as well. Sometimes it's not, you know, it doesn't have to be somebody who's doing the same thing that you're doing. It's just their support can be very influential, can't they? And or practical support by giving you equipment.
Just bouncing ideas off, or problem solving, like, why has this happened? You both haven't got a full set of knowledge, but together you can cobble together ideas and like understand, oh, if we try this, this will happen, or, you know.
Yeah, that's it. And I think when you're at art school, there is that creative community, isn't there, that you can talk to each other, etc. And sometimes when you become a professional maker, then you're sort of out in the world on your own, and it's great if you're in a studio complex, because that sort of continues a little bit, or have a shared studio. But it's great to be able to have somebody to have those creative conversations with, isn't it?
Yeah, and you meet more people as you go along that are closer to what you're actually doing. that you can bounce ideas off because you use the same materials or whatever.
Yeah. Has anyone else got anything similar, like teachers that were particularly influential?
Yeah, my history teacher, we did the Industrial Revolution when I was in school, and I was completely fascinated by the whole thing, the machinery, the factories, the making, and I think that's probably where I developed my love of history, because a lot of my work comes from historical artifacts. I go to lots of museums, I take lots of photographs of things that I'm interested in. For example, this collection that I've got behind me all comes from a sort of research I did about the Titanic. Loved the story, went to Belfast, took lots of photographs, and I worked as a freelance stylist for a photographer for many years, and I think I always start with taking photographs of things now, because that's the format that I visually see things in. You know, I can isolate the details that I find fascinating. So just to give you an example, this pattern here came from the very iconic Harland and Wolff cranes that are in Belfast that we used to make the Titanic. And although it looks absolutely nothing like them, I took photographs of the cranes, but from certain angles that I liked, and then I take those photographs into Photoshop, and I strip away all the elements that I don't want, that leaves me with a shape, and then that shape gets repeated until the pattern that I really enjoy. But it's sort of, I've discovered that all my work has been that way. You know, I war memorabilia, you know, tools, artifacts, all kinds of things like that, transport, cars, but always go in to hone in on the time details. So all my work comes from history, and I'm sure that that was helped by my teacher who inspired me in history, but also because my dad has lots of interest in all those kind of mechanical things as well. So yeah, it's when you start thinking about it, it's surprising where it all comes from.
Absolutely, yeah. It's taken, ask, you know, something like this conversation, being asked to sort of take that step back and think, actually, there's a thread here that I hadn't realised.
And you realise it's all actually, your whole life is just connected, and it all goes into your work. It's quite surprising.
Yeah, all these little elements. Yeah. Anyone else?
Yes, Louise, can I come in?
Yes, of course.
You were talking earlier about the support you get when you're at art college, and that when you're out in the big wide world, there's not so much support. I belong to a cooperative of over 100 artists in the South Lakes. It's called Green Door Artists, and that is a wonderful way of getting feedback and trying things out and asking people's opinions. It's a very supportive organisation. And we have a paid administrator who does an awful lot on social media. So that's quite an influence and quite a support, particularly as we're in a rural area. This is South Lakes. And if you're in a rural area and you need some kind of support, it's a really good way of getting that support.
Yeah, that sounds like an amazing network, and it is. It's so important to have those creative networks, whether they're large like that, or it could just be, you know, like as I said, sharing a studio.
Yes,
and
it could be any size.
But and especially at this time, I suppose, when everyone's very physically disconnected, those sorts of networks have probably become even more important. As you said, in rural areas, they're important all the time. But at this time, when there's no chance of meeting up physically or connecting, then become even more important, I guess. Charlotte, did you have any teachers or anything?
I do feel really like I've been very blessed with the different experiences that I've had with teachers and mentors over the years. And I think I do mother as well, just for supporting me and allowing me to make my own decisions, even as far as which secondary school I went to. My secondary school art teacher was just really, really good, and we actually started with the final piece and worked backwards, and it was just a way of teaching us something. It was interesting. I think it was teaching us how to how to make sure we've got all the design and development without just trying to get the final piece done. So we'd already done that, so we could concentrate on, you know, how you research and different ways of finding different inspiration. You know, as a jeweler, I don't look to other jewelers for inspiration. I look at other like buildings and nature, other designers that make things out of lots of, you know, out of wood or ceramics, and you know, I look at lots of different people for inspiration, and I think I owe that to both my mother and her. And then with college and university, I actually went on to do like fine art and kind of mixed media courses, so that I could really explore what I was best at, and didn't really try and home in too soon. And through doing that, really, it's really shaped what I make now. So I had a teacher that suggested trying out etching, and then through that I've kind of developed my own style of etching that's unique to me, really, and just worked. And then after university in 2009, I went on to like a startup scheme with Jewellers and Silversmiths, and that's just given me that gave me the confidence that I knew what I was doing in jewellery, because I felt more like an artist than I did a jeweller at that point. Now I feel like I have a nice mix of both. Now 10 years experience now in jewellery making. People like, I don't know if people like Catherine Campbell-Legg and Kerry O'Connor and Miranda Sharpers in Birmingham Jewellery Quarter, they just help share their knowledge of what they've learned over the years, and it's just been had a massive impact, really, I think, on my career, and just helping me understand how I can fit in with the industry, really.
Yeah, again, so that, you know, building up a network once you leave college, as you said, is really, really important, isn't it? Yeah. Francesca, what about you?
So I'm really lucky to be in Yorkshire Art Space in Sheffield, and I'm surrounded by a lot of experienced artists and silversmiths, as well as other makers as well, ceramicists, painters. So I'm part of the Starter Studio, and I share the workshop with 6 other makers. And we've got technicians that come in and help us, and they've always encouraged our making and always shared their knowledge, as well as the history of silversmithing as well, which has really inspired me in the last few years. So it's always the technicians, the ones that are behind the scenes, that really have inspired me, and sharing their experiences and stuff.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And like you said, that's nice to have an environment where you've got a variety of mediums going on in that kind of studio complex. You know, that's going to have different influences, isn't it, when you I've got different mediums going on. But as you said, I think technicians very often are very influential on people and tend to get a little bit forgotten. So that's really important, because they can have so much technical knowledge that will really push your techniques onwards, haven't they? So yeah, that's brilliant. Kate, what about you?
I guess at school, at secondary school, I had a teacher who was influential in that he taught me all of the basics in sort of how to use a pencil, how to use paintbrushes. You know, I even put water in a square tub because he used to tell us not to use round tubs so that they didn't knock over the tables. So I think that sort of set my baseline for art in general. I went to university and I did graphic design, which is sort of completely different to what I do now. And I guess I learned a lot of skills there using paper. I did print, and typography really was my thing at uni. So everything was 2D and flat, and involved a lot of paper. So I'd have spent a lot of time playing with it. But I guess since leaving university and having children, and I started to get creative for myself rather than doing the graphic design that I used to do for a career. And yeah, having my children and moving to the countryside, we now live out in the middle of nowhere. So I have lots of these random rural connections which aren't artistic necessarily. Like, you wouldn't initially think them to be artistic, but they are. So I've got friends who are like florists, who do various different things, and it's nice to have that support there and that influence, even though they don't do similar things to you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think support networks are really important. I mean, I did City and Guilds while I was teaching, when my children were small, and we stayed together as a group, and we used to meet once a month, a group called Textiles, and it was that feedback, because you do this course and it's quite intense. I mean, not as intense as a full-time course at university, but it was pretty intense, and you're working as well. And we stayed together and we met once a month, and we used to take it in turn. We'd either take work that we'd done or we hadn't, that we were stuck with, but also the bookmaking came from that, because we used to take it in turns to sort of cascade something perhaps one of us had learned on a workshop. And so the bookmaking came from that. Somebody showed us how to do that. And it is like you said before, it's like that critical friend thing, which is why during lockdown it's been really good that there's been two of us here. Yeah. Because you lose that other contact, and I think as well, I have been very lucky with my support surrounds, because I used to exhibit with two friends as Page Paper Stitch, and we all made books, and we exhibit together at book fairs and things, and various exhibitions that we'd put on in a couple at Farfield Mill and then a gallery in Kendal. And it is that feeding off other people, isn't it? You're not copying, you're just taking, you think, oh yeah, I could try it like that, or perhaps that would work. Whereas if you're just stuck on your own, it must be very hard. I think it must have been quite hard for people on their own in lockdown without that support that you're used to. Definitely. So, without somebody to give you a kick up the bum every so often and say, just go in there and get something done. Because I must say, I drifted for quite a long time at the beginning of lockdown, and without Keith giving me a poke every so often and saying, of course you can, just go do something.
Well, like I said, I think all creative people would say that they need to feed off other creative people. I think that's a fairly, and as you said, it's not copying or anything. Sometimes it is purely support and just geeing you along or whatever. I think to have that, whether it's from family members, like you said, or within a studio complex, or even if it's only you can meet colleagues through Zoom and those sorts of channels, that's, and through social media as well, through having those conversations. I know, Lynda, you've been part of one of the sewing groups, and I put in my newsletter a couple of days ago that I saw them as sort of virtual sewing bees. When I was young, my mum and grandmother would talk about how in the sort of 40s they would go, in the 50s would go to sewing bees with ants and things like that, and I thought these online communities that have sprung up through lockdown, which I know you were part of one of them, I don't know if anyone else was, but that's sort of what it reminds me of, and that's I would imagine has been an influence as well.
The MAP group, the group you're talking about that I'm a member of, I mean, we are now meeting once a week on Zoom to keep in touch, but we've been meeting for quite a few years, once a month in people's houses. And, without them, because we're part of a group and an idea sparks, an exhibition happens, and we all just get involved with it. It's surprising just how much that does influence, just doing other exhibitions, other artistic things. If we didn't do Linen Futures, which was all about connecting with Irish linen and promoting Irish linen, I wouldn't have been introduced to Irish linen, which that's what my bags are made of, and I probably wouldn't have gone to Belfast and done the Titanic thing. So it just rolls on, and it all influences in your own work, even though the actual exhibition was about something else, but it all influences. And it's very, very valuable to have good craftspeople that you can talk to and feed off and bounce ideas from. Definitely.
Yeah, brilliant, great. So I just wondered if there was any. I mean, we've touched on some of these. Whether there's any other factors you feel are particularly influential in your life. So I'd mentioned a few prior to this meeting. So it could be personal circumstances like becoming a parent, as Kate was saying. It could be working, as Elizabeth was saying. Being a teacher had an influence. I was thinking it could possibly be traveling or researching a particular subject, as Lynda was saying, or political events or world events, or whether there's any other things that we've not covered that people feel are particularly influential in their work. Francesca, you were talking a little bit about your family background, but in Ghana, but also, but not just the family background, but talking about the culture. So, and that being an influence.
Yeah, family plays a big role, I think, in my work, particularly. A lot of the pieces that I make, I tend to make a few at a time and together. And even though they're all one-off pieces, they kind of sit together as a family. So I'll bring the camera forward. So they usually sit in groups together, and even though they don't have the same features, or they're not made in the same way, they still have like a similar, like a grouping. So yeah, family's a big thing that I look at. I look at loads of family photos and draw from that, and try to create that in objects, basically.
Yeah. Oh, that's brilliant. And anyone else?
I make functional pottery. I'm influenced a lot by food. I really like eating food. A good potter is generally quite a good chef as well, because you grow up using things. My family always had like pots in the house that you could cook with, and they got smashed, and it doesn't matter. It's like, and then once you start thinking about food, you think, oh yeah, that would look good in this, or oh, I haven't got something to cook that, so I'll make something to cook that. It's like opens up different doors, I suppose.
Yeah, definitely. And does that affect, I would imagine that affects colours as well, because if you're thinking about, certain foods needing a certain pot, but then also maybe thinking, well, the colour of that food is whatever, and it would work on a certain colour, does it affect colours too?
I suppose some people think about that. I just splash loads of different colour on anyway, so if it works in one colour, it will sell in another colour. So
Anyone else got anything? Elizabeth, did you want to talk a bit more about teaching and whether how much?
Well, no, I mean, most of the work I've done has been since I finished teaching. I mean, I still teach workshops, bookmaking workshops, but no, I was very lucky. I got a chance to take voluntary redundancy in my early 50s. The school had a falling role, and it coincided with a house move as well, and more space and more time. And it is that, it's, I don't know really. So no, not really the teaching. Although I do enjoy still teaching workshops, and I was very reluctant at first. I was asked to do a couple of workshops for children. I'm thinking, oh God, I'll get flashbacks. But no, I thought it was nice to be back in that classroom situation again. As long as I knew I could go home, it's a bit like graduate, really. They're very nice, but you can give them back. But the books are really only one aspect of my work. They tend to be what I do for shows, because they are. I mean, the idea of the trays is very unusual. I know people just stand there and say, "Oh, I've never seen anything like that before," which is really good. I mean, I know the print trays get used for all sorts of things, but I don't think there's anybody else who's mad enough to sit making little tiny books that go in the trays, so each, little tiny concertinas that go in the trays and things, so all the things come out. The other nice thing, and it's not my family, but they also link to other people's families. I've done some of the trades I've done as commissions. The first one was for somebody I knew, actually, the person who commissioned it, and it was for an 80th birthday present, and the rest of the family had clubbed together, and I had a full-size tray, and they gave me lots of information about this person, and I collected lots of different books and made this, and it was a full-size tray. That was called A Library of My Life.
Lovely.
They did for the man. And I've done a few more commissions, and another 80th, a 50th, a wedding anniversary one. And it's that being let into other people's families, which is really interesting, and other people's photographs. And that's a really fascinating aspect. I haven't had a commission for quite a long time. So I'm always open to commissions for things, because I say it's more nerve-wracking, isn't it, doing a commission, because you think, oh God, are they going to like it when I finish? Of course, if it's a personal thing, it isn't any good to anybody else, you know.
No, that's right.
So there's that extra pressure.
That's interesting. You know, you're talking about the commission. I suppose it's like Keith was saying about, you know, getting that feedback from people has an influence then going forward, I would imagine. Yeah, Kit, did you want to bring in any other influences that you wanted to talk about?
Who?
Oh, me. Keith, I was asking.
Sorry, Louise, it's poor sound quality in here. Could you repeat the question?
Just whether, I mean, you talked about, you know, people talking to you at fairs and things, and that having an influence on your work. And I just wondered if there was anything else like that, you know, any other outside influences that have been important for you.
It is having your ears open. I think it's very important to listen. Sometimes the comments might not be totally positive, but they can be useful as well. And we've got to listen to them all. We're making the artwork because we want to make that kind of artwork, but we do have to have one eye and one ear on the people that are buying it. I can track a series of people that pointed me in various directions, and I've loved it. Sometimes it might not be comfortable, but yeah, it's good. You've got to do it.
Yeah. Sometimes the slightly uncomfortable and out of your comfort zone, sometimes this leads you down a more exciting path, I suppose.
That's interesting what Keith was saying about outside influences, because when I started, after I finished my degree, I was making cushions and throws and things with silkscreen printing, etc. And I found them a little bit difficult to sell, because it's something that you know, people you don't buy them on a whim, a cushion. You're usually changing your decor and then fitting them in. So and then a friend of mine said to me, she picked up one of my cushions, she said, oh, this would be a lovely bag. And it's because my cushions were like this. They always had a plain bit and then a patterned bit. And she said, can you make this for me into a bag? And I thought, really? Oh gosh, that's a really good idea. And that's how I got into making bags. And you know, people buy bags all the time, whether you need another one or not. So
on a whim,
you buy them on a whim. So you like you said, Keith, listening to people and listening to what they like and their ideas is definitely a
important
thing
as well.
to do. Yeah.
Has anyone got any other points they wanted to make before we close? We've exhausted our influences completely. Thank you all so much for taking part in Digital Craft Festival. Thank you to all the makers, and hope you'll join us at Digital Craft Festival website. Thanks very much. Bye.
Brilliant. Thank you, Louise.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.